Have you found yourself on a path of self-awareness only to somehow just end up feeling worse about yourself? As though the more insight you gain into yourself, the more you understand yourself and see who you really are, the more you seem to confirm the quiet suspicion that there's just something terribly wrong with you. That's not awareness, that's just shame creeping in. And it wears a very convincing disguise. Hi, I'm Madalena and this is You Reclaimed. Around here, we talk a lot about how we take our lives back from the lasting effects of childhood trauma, from anxiety, and from emotional dysregulation in general. And we do this work so that we can finally live on our own terms. And today we're talking about shame and how easily it disguises itself as a quest for self-awareness. Stick around to the end of this video and we'll talk about what the antidote to shame actually is and how we can start injecting it into our own lives.
Wait, did you subscribe yet? I have a lot more to share and I'd love to have you here for it. It really helps my channel grow and I appreciate it so much.
First and foremost, let's talk about what shame actually feels like in the body so we're all on the same page. Shame often shows up as a knot in your throat or in your chest, or that hollow aching feeling in your stomach, a sudden sense that you need to hide or disappear. And of course, the negative, critical, self-deprecating thoughts like, there's something wrong with me, or why am I like this? And because of how much shame affects us emotionally and physically, it can also show up as symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of depression. But you might be asking yourself, well, what's the difference between shame and guilt? Because sometimes I do feel bad and for good reason. Like I said the wrong things and I hurt a friend's feelings, or I messed something up at work and my coworkers are now rightfully upset with me. I feel bad. Why shouldn't I feel bad? Because what you're describing there is mostly guilt. Well, so then what is the difference? The difference is that guilt says, I screwed up, I made a mistake, and I feel bad about that. It's situational. Shame says, I am the mistake. Everything about me is the problem. Guilt is usually about a specific action or behavior, and it is tied to something you did or you didn't do, and it tends to pass. But shame, it throws a blanket over your entire identity, and it tends to linger no matter how well you behave, because it's not actually tied to your behavior. It goes much deeper than that. You can feel ashamed about your entire being even when you've done absolutely nothing wrong. And shame doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not born in a vacuum. It usually has a root, something that with a little bit of introspection and the right questions, we can trace back. Sometimes we remember the exact cause, and sometimes it's more diffuse. Maybe we can trace it back to a general stage of our life or a general time span. But here are some common sources of shame: direct verbal, physical, or emotional abuse, constant criticism from parents or teachers or people close to us, well-meaning but harsh judgments from people who took care of us, like our parents or other people, bullying in childhood, abandonment during the years we needed connection from people the most, or traumatic life experiences that quietly sort of marked us as bad or unworthy people. And especially when these things happened in our earlier years, when we didn't know how to process pain or confusion or rejection. So we internalized the message of something being wrong with us, and we started believing things like, I ruin things, or I'm hard to love, or no one ever sticks around for me, there's something wrong with me, I always get in the way, I can't do anything right. And when we sit with those beliefs long enough, eventually we stop questioning them, and they just become part of our inner world. And we can start calling it self-awareness. So we say things like, I know I ruin everything, I'm just a difficult person. Or people leave me because I make it too hard to love me. I always do something that causes my partners to fall out of love with me. And then we use self-help books or therapy language to reinforce these beliefs, and we turn these thoughts into a never-ending quest to fix ourselves. But what we're really doing is we're mistaking shame for insight. So shame can be quite sneaky. It doesn't always sound like I hate myself or I'm complete garbage. A lot of the time it dresses up in smart, insightful sounding self-awareness, and it sounds like I know I sabotage myself, or I always attract the wrong kinds of people. I overreact, it's just me, or I want too much from my partners. And the thing is, on the surface, it does sound like insight, but it's not really. It's just shame wearing a fancy lab coat, because if you really listen to your own words to these thoughts, there are no solutions there. There's no sense of compassion. There's no invitation to grow with patience or curiosity for yourself. Statements like this just leave you feeling really small. Real self-awareness sounds a little bit different. It's curious instead of condemning. It sounds like, I notice that I get triggered when my partner pulls away. Or I'm beginning to see that I shut down when I feel unseen by my partner. Or no one ever modeled for me what safe conflict looks like, so now I panic when things get tense. There's a big difference. You can absolutely reflect on your patterns, and we can look at your behaviors and your triggers, but you don't have to put yourself down in the process, right? You're just observing. Unaddressed shame tends to coat our lives and creep into all facets of who we are as human beings. It can make us isolate ourselves from our friends, from family, from romantic partners. It can cause us to live in chronic anxiety or panic and in long bouts of depression. And it can fuel unending perfectionism and people-pleasing and numbing ourselves emotionally with all kinds of unhealthy coping tactics like overeating or drug use or procrastination or total immobility. It can leave us emotionally paralyzed to the point where we're completely afraid to take risks or to set healthy boundaries or to speak up for ourselves. Or it can push us into even more damaging self-destructive patterns that alienate us from everything and everyone. Shame is not just painful, it's absolutely exhausting. And it can leave you feeling like you don't know how to dig your way out of it because you don't even know how to speak to yourself in a way that doesn't produce more shame on top of shame on top of shame. So what does shame actually need from us in order to budge, to get it out of the way so that we can access real self-awareness? Well, it doesn't need more self-damaging thoughts. It doesn't need more fixing. And most of the time, it doesn't even need more analysis. Because analysis is often the very thing we use to fuel our own shame. Shame doesn't need a 17-step improvement plan or another round of self-help books. What it really needs is self-compassion. And the great news is self-compassion is absolutely free. It doesn't require much to learn. It's something that we can start practicing right now, anywhere, anytime. Self-compassion can look like gently soothing yourself when you catch your inner critic start spiraling. It can look like acknowledging your pain, whatever it is, your anger, your envy, your embarrassment, even rage. But instead of judging yourself for having these emotions, it can look like offering kind words and kind thoughts to the little person inside of you who did the best they could at one point with the circumstances they had available. And it can look like trying to understand yourself, not just evaluating your performance all the time, because performance is exhausting. Let's talk about a few simple things we can try to start healing pervasive shame that stays with us. One of the most useful practices is tracking our shame thoughts. That means keeping a journal or just a simple note on your phone where you write down any moment when you suddenly feel defective, like you're not enough, like you just can't do anything right. Write down the feeling and what triggered it. What happened right before you felt that way? Was it something external, like a comment or an event? Or was it something internal, like a flash of anger or envy? What kind of story did your mind start telling you right before that feeling came in? Next, we can try tracing our shame backwards. What's the first time I remember having this particular feeling? Was it a parent who called me lazy or said I never did anything right? Was it a teacher who humiliated me in front of the class and made everyone laugh? Was it a partner who made me feel like I had to work for their affection or for their love? But sometimes we can't trace it back to one single moment. Although we can often trace it to a period in our life. Maybe we say, my earliest memories were feeling like I wasn't good enough for my parents. Or my early school years felt like I was constantly hiding. Even if all we can do is trace it back to a time period, that's enough, because now we can at least start to offer compassion to that younger version of ourselves who never got compassion at the time they needed it. We can also start to reframe the shame statements we tend to use with ourselves. And this might sound like turning statements like, I can't get anything right, into, I'm struggling with this because I do care about the outcome very much. Or I always overreact, into, I'm learning how to regulate myself instead of reacting with anger. Or I know this feeling from when I was younger, but it doesn't belong here anymore, and I'm working on changing that. And in intense moments of shame, we can try turning toward ourselves and asking ourselves, what do I need right now? Do I need comfort from myself or from someone else? Am I trying to escape a harder feeling that's underneath this shame, like envy or grief or fear? What would it feel like to be cared for in this moment? How would I need to care for myself? How would I need someone else to care for me? These questions help us to get underneath the shame and be able to figure out what deeper parts of us are really asking for. Instead of spiraling into self-criticism or reaching for coping strategies that leave us even more disconnected. At the bottom of wherever your shame came from, it helps to remind yourself you're not some sort of problem that needs to be solved. Yes, insight is useful, and self-awareness is obviously good to have, but it should never become a reason to punish yourself. You have to accept your own humanity and remember that you, as all of us, are all living through similarly flawed, messy human experiences. You're allowed to learn and grow and reflect imperfectly without wounding yourself further in the process. Shame will tell you that you're not good enough to actually heal. But compassion reminds you that healing is yours to have. Of course you can heal. You're worthy of it, as are all of us. If you enjoy this kind of content, please consider liking and subscribing. Until next time.